and welcome to episode 153 of Silver Lining for Learning. Micro-credentials and specializations for the masses, which is one of my areas of interest. Alternative credentials for a non-traditional age, which is another one of my interests. So this could be a fascinating show. First, let me introduce my co-host. If you're listening to the podcast show, we have Chris Deedy here from Harvard every week, as along with Young Zhao from the University of Kansas and the University of Melbourne, and Punya Mishra from Arizona State University. Today, we have 4 guests with us. In fact, we've got a team of researchers who've worked together on a new report. And that new report is titled Benefits and Costs of Participation in MOOC-Based Alternative Credentials, MicroMasters and Specializations. If you're seeing this in YouTube, this is what the report looks like. Go ahead and download it. You can also get it from the blog post. Just click on the link that's provided and take a look. Now, our guests have done a series of reports over time related to alternative degrees, and they're going to talk about the changes they've seen in the data. In fact, they're going to give us a hint a little bit of some new data. We're having breaking news on this special 153 episode of Silver Lining for Learning. Fiona Holland is the lead researcher, founder, and director of EdResearcher, an independent research evaluation and development organization. Previously, she was senior researcher at Teachers College, Columbia University, where she conducted many studies in both quantitative and qualitative research. If there was an educational issue or decision to be made, she was likely to be one calculating the results. She looked at cost-benefit analysis, cost-utility analysis, the added value of different educational programs and practices. She gets into educational decision-making and how we can improve new programs and initiatives. She's worked in high school. She's worked in early literacy elementaries, higher ed, you name it, she's done it. And she's got a team along with her today that she'll introduce to us. She'll also provide us with a bit of an overview of this particular report. In fact, each of our guests will provide about 3-minute overviews of what they see as important within this report. And then after that, we'll go through the report again with questions for Fiona, questions about the area in general. So Fiona, would you like to add to the gaps that I left out in terms of your bio and what you're working on, and also introduce your co-hosts?
Sure. Well, you seem to know more about me than I know about myself, but your portrayal was pretty accurate. I'm generally interested in educational technology, but have explored other areas as well. And currently, I'm getting quite interested in AI in education, like everybody else. So that's probably,
yes, we are.
That's my most recent addition to the portfolio of interest. But generally, focus on educational technology and also on return on investment of educational programs and practices. So those are my 2 broad areas of interest. I would just say that my original career path was in finance. So that's kind of why I have this interest in return on investment. So I did that for a few years after graduating from college.
You too. I'm a former CPA, so
recovering finance people. Right?
That's why I like reading your reports, and you're quick getting to the data, very easy to read, understandable. That's the way finance and accounting people are.
Yeah, well, how you have to be, right?
Cut to the chase, right?
Anyway, I am very fortunate to have several other researchers who work with me or collaborate with me on various projects, and I have 3 of them here. I'm going to let them each say a couple of words about themselves. Let's start with Aasiya, and then Katherine, and then Yuan. Please just say a minute or so about yourself. Well, not even a minute, because we probably don't have that much time.
Thank you, Fiona. So my name's Aasiya Kazi. I'm a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Oxford. And my research interests are gender, education, and human rights. So I think that should do it.
Hello all, my name is Katherine Javier. I am an economist specialized in international development from the University of Manchester and in applied statistics from the University of Columbia. I have been working in research and development in the policy field for the past 10 years or so. And my research interests are education, strategic planning, competitiveness, rural development, and many others that I will not say because of time.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yuan Ginsberg. I work as an educational program evaluation analyst at a public school district. But outside of my day job, I also do research with Fiona, including this project that we're going to talk about today.
Thank you all. Fiona?
Okay, so, all right, thanks, Kurt. Everybody see the screen okay? Put a thumbs up if it looks good. Great, thank you so much. So I'm going to—
We do, but it's Gazi's slides.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
So I think you have to go back.
Yeah, I will. I'll just see if I can. Give me a moment just to get out of here. Great. All right.
While you're looking for the slides, great to have all four of you on this show. We have folks from Pakistan with us, the Dominican Republic, as well as New York City. So we have a diverse guest base today. There you go, Fiona.
Great. Okay, so as I said, I was going to kick off with a few slides that will provide some highlights on the study of benefits and costs of participation in MOOC-based alternative credentials. I'm going to give you a little background and talk about the motivation for the study, and then Aasiya will talk about learner demographics and also about the benefits to learners of participating in these courses. Katherine is going to talk about the costs, opportunity costs, and also what learners did in terms of follow-up education. And Yuan is going to introduce some new findings that we have about employer support or lack thereof for employee participation in these types of credentials. So before we go any further, I would like to just give you our definition of alternative credentials. They're non-traditional forms of certificate recognition or certification that individuals can obtain to demonstrate their skills, knowledge, or achievements in a particular field. And these are typically offered by organizations such as platforms like edX or Coursera, or industry associations that are outside of formal education systems. And as you heard a little bit at the beginning, we're interested in this area because it intersects two research interests: educational technology and return on investment for educational programs. You'll all recall that MOOCs in particular, but also other alternative credentials, were heralded as cost-effective education at scale. So we designed a study to see if this prediction was accurate. Just to give you a bit of a timeline to let you know how we got to this particular study. You'll recall that there was an explosion of MOOCs onto the education scene back in 2011-12 in the US. Over the next couple of years, a colleague and I conducted about 100 interviews with people at organizations offering these MOOCs, mostly universities, to try to understand the benefits to the organizations of offering these types of programs, and also what were the costs of developing and delivering the courses. In 2015, Zengao and colleagues studied the benefits to learners of taking individual MOOCs, but their focus was on the learner. Around the same time, the people who were providing the MOOCs started packaging them into series of courses such as nano degrees, specializations, and micromasters. So we hypothesized that the benefits of series of courses with a credential would be greater than the benefits of individual MOOCs. We designed this longitudinal descriptive study that involved 3 voluntary surveys for people participating in Coursera specializations or edX micromasters. The links to Qualtrics surveys were embedded in the courses or emailed to participants. The first survey was sent out over a course of 5 years, and we had about 26,000 respondents. The second survey was sent out to people who completed one of the programs and earned the credential, and we had about 2,300 respondents. And then the final survey, which went out in the spring of this year, was emailed to over 16,000 people who either completed the program at least a year ago or who started more than 18 months ago. But we had very few responses. So this information is not included in the final report. Just a couple of points before we move to the findings. This was a voluntary participation in the surveys, so we can't say that we're being representative of the learners in the programs themselves, or even of learners across the board taking all types of credentials, alternative credentials. And because the study is descriptive and self-report, we're making no claims about causality. So with that, let me turn it over to Aasiya.
Great, thank you, Fiona. So I'm going to focus on who our learners were. And next, please. So we found that learners were usually an average of 33 years old when they started the series and completed it at 34. We found that there were 46% completers, that is people who earned a credential, identified as female, 53% as male, and 0.53% as other. Completers were mostly white or Asian, so 38% were white, 36% Asian, 6% Black, and 5% multiracial. 14% identified as Hispanic. Completers lived in 122 different countries, but the largest concentration was in the US at 24%, followed by India at 10%. Only 18% completers were students in a formal degree program. And on the whole, we found that learners who completed a MicroMasters or specializations were pretty similar in the demographics to those who began the courses, except that they were more likely to be female and they were more likely to be fluent or very good in English. And they were less likely to be a student. Next. We also found that our completers were generally already pretty well educated. So 79% had at least a bachelor's degree and 39% a higher degree. Next, please.
Aasiya, it's actually moved.
Okay, I can't see it. So, oh, okay, I see it now. Most of them were either worked full-time or part-time or ran their own business. So 78% MicroMasters completers and 69% specialization completers. Let's move on to how learners expected to benefit from earning a credential to how they actually benefited or reported benefiting from earning one. So the highest reported benefit was learning something new. 27 anticipated this as a benefit and 94 actually reported it. Next, 41% expected their job performance to improve and 38% actually reported this as a benefit. 22% were expecting that it would help start their own business, but only 12% reported that it did. 15% expected that it might improve the application to a formal degree program, but 9% reported this as a benefit. And 12% were anticipating a job promotion, while only 5% actually got one. Finally, 10% learners were anticipating getting a pay raise, but 5% actually got one.
I have a question before we move on to the next set of slides, if I may, Aasiya. So quick question, Aasiya. You said average age was like around 30 something. You said 33. Do we have a
33.
sense of the range?
Yes.
Youngest to oldest. I'm just curious about that because one of the things with MOOCs is supposed to be like, it opens it up for everybody. So I'm just curious what that range was like.
Yes, so the average, interestingly, from the youngest being 7 to the oldest being 101.
Wow. Was it like skewed in some way towards a certain age? Do you know?
My feeling is that I remember it being mostly people in their 30s.
Okay. And maybe I missed this. What was the content of these courses?
Right. So we surveyed a total of 8 programs, and they were mostly in business, finance, data science, computer analytics, and marketing.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm going to go on and talk about opportunity cost and follow-up study plans of these completers. So next slide, please. So before starting to talk about the conclusions of opportunity cost, we have to define what is an opportunity cost. And an opportunity cost are basically foregone opportunities of choosing one alternative over another. Say you are starting up a business. When you start up a business and you have a job, you have to relinquish that job, that steady salary, that possibility of networking, the potential progression pathway that you will have as a corporate, rock star when you engage in a business. So the same happens with education, with formal education and with alternative credentials. When you engage or pursue this type of education, you have to relinquish some elements. In this case, there is forgone money and there is forgone time. So in terms of money, you have to pay for the course fees. You have to you do some work that it's paid, but maybe during your work time, you have to work in this course because your employer is demanding you to do so. There is also forgone time. You have leisure time that you're investing in the course, and also work time that you are invested in the course. So now that we know the definition of opportunity cost, let's move on to the actual conclusions. Well, the first conclusion was the vast majority of completers gave up unpaid leisure time to complete the course. They gave up many elements, as you can see in this slide. And for those that are listening, they had to give up money, for example, to pay someone else to take care of their children, their family members. They have to quit some time from their formal studies. Say they were at the university studying for a bachelor's, they had to stop that to study their alternative credentials. But the highest opportunity cost was giving up unpaid leisure time. 88% of MicroMasters completed gave up leisure time, while 77% of specialization completers gave up unpaid leisure times to complete their AC credential. Next slide.
Looks like the slides are going slowly, aren't they?
Okay, well, it's okay. I have the conclusions here, so I can keep on talking. Well, the second conclusion was that the majority of participants invested their own resources to pay for the course fees. 68% of MicroMasters completers paid their course fees with their own money versus 58% of specialization completers that paid the course fees with their own money. If you can see, for the ones that are on YouTube, the chart on the right, the expected program cost for a MicroMasters was between $900 and $1,300, but the median fee paid was $1,200 approximately. So quite within the range. Regarding specialization, the expected program cost was $325, but the median fee paid was approximately $79. This is due because many of these platforms that offer courses like EDS and Coursera, they offer scholarships or they offer free trials. So some students take advantage of these to complete specializations. So the next conclusion was that a small fraction of employers promoted continuous training by paying for time invested or contributing towards the payment of the fees. For example, if you can check at this chart, even though the fraction was small, as I stated in the conclusion, the contribution in terms of the money contributed was significant. If you can see MicroMasters, for MicroMasters, 11% of completers receive some type of payment or assistance with the fees by their employer. And the median contribution was around $1,200. Even though the assistance in terms of percentage was small, the fee paid was quite large. And specialization completers, they on average, 24% of them on average receive some contribution by their employer. But the median contribution was lower, situated around $100. So another conclusion was that the estimated opportunity cost was proportionally higher for MicroMasters completers. MicroMasters completers, they had to invest in the program or invest around 412 hours in every course. And the recommended time to invest in the program is between 100 and 400 hours. So they were a little bit above the range. Specialization completers, the time to complete one of these courses is around 38 to 78 hours, and they spend an average time of 42 hours. So they were right in the average. So we did a calculation of the foregone salary of this person by engaging in the types of hours that they did to complete the course, and considering a median salary, annual salary of $59,000 for MicroMasters completers, they had foregone earnings of approximately $11,700, whereas specializations completers had a foregone earnings of approximately $800. If you can see, the foregone earnings of MicroMasters completers were roughly 20% of their annual income versus only 2% of specialization completers. It's higher, but we have to bear in mind that this is only one aspect of the opportunity cost, which is the foregone earnings. But we have to think of the benefits they received, like increased income, say, or new job opportunities. This will be addressed and on the next part of the presentation. So in terms of career progression of enrolling in different programs, the number of students enrolling in a degree program after completing an AC credential, an alternative credential, was low. Approximately only 1 in every 10 completers indicated that completing the MicroMasters or specialization program had improved their application to an actual degree program. So only 4% of completers indicated that completed the program improved their application to a degree program at a different university, and only 7% of the MicroMasters completed indicated that completing the program improved the application to a related full master's degree. So this idea of that AC were to democratize education and improve access to university and further degrees, it's not evident in our findings. So finally, results suggest that alternative credentials are not democratizing education or translating into increased earnings. The expectation was to complete a MicroMasters and move on to a formal graduate program, but this is happening very little, as you saw in the data. It is not clear if completers are recovering their investments, the time and money investments. As you saw on the data, the amount of money invested in a course and the amount of time is quite significant, around 400 hours for MicroMasters and nearly $12,000 to complete the course. And also completers are improving their job performance and networking, but this does not necessarily translate into increased earnings. So we still don't know if the investment is worth it. It is too early to call. I'm gonna leave you with my colleague, Yuan, that will continue with the presentation.
Thank you, Katherine. Apparently, it's a pretty big investment to put time in alternative credentials. And now I'll give you guys a more zoomed-in view on course completers who are working while participating in the courses, and especially take a more in-depth look at employers that support employees' participation in alternative credentials. This is a supplementary report that we have been working on, and the brief will be available soon at the link on this page. That you're the first ones to hear it. So 316 respondents reported that they were asked by their employer to take the online courses. 104 of them identified the organization that they worked for. For every employer named, we searched online using the employer's name for information about the organization, and we categorized employers by sector. We found that almost a quarter of the 104 respondents worked in financial services, 12% worked in airline industry, and less than 1/10 of them worked in education. We also took a look at where those employers were located. And not surprisingly, the US has the highest concentration, since many of the program participants were from the US. But we also noticed that although dispersed in many different countries, over half of the 104 completers asked by their employers to participate in the programs were based in Asia, indicating higher buy-ins of alternative credentials among organizations in that area. We then investigated the extent to which employers supported learners financially for their participation in alternative credentials. Almost 280 completers reported that their employers contributed to the course fees. The employers paid out of the fees for 84% and partial fees for 16% of the learners. 126 respondents identified their employers, which allowed us to categorize them by sector. A quarter of them worked in financial institutions such as Citibank. Less than 8% worked in the field of IT. 6% were in manufacturing, and another 6% were in education. Other sectors mentioned include healthcare and government. 211 respondents said they were paid by their employer for all or part of the time spent on the courses. 62% of them for all of their time, and 38% for some of their time. 93 of these completers named their employers, and the three most frequently appearing sectors are finance, education, and government. So one of the things I found most interesting is that some employers were asking employees to take the courses, but not always supporting them by paying the fees and paying for study time. You can see from this Venn diagram that of the 104 completers who were asked by their employers to take the courses, the employers covered fees and paid for study time for less than a quarter. And for 40 of them, they had to pay the course fees out of their own pocket or pursue other funding sources, and also complete the course during unpaid hours. All right, now Fiona will take over and share some key takeaways.
Thanks, Yuan. Kurt, before I let you take over again, I'm just going to wrap up with one slide of key takeaways and leave you or leave us with some questions that we might want to address, but you may have other ideas. So key takeaways for us were that almost all learners who earned either a MicroMasters or specialization credential gain new knowledge. That's pretty significant for the field of education. To learn something from a course is not always a given. And this is despite the fact that they were already quite well educated. So I think that's quite an achievement. Secondly, we found that few completers of the credentials were pursuing further education. That's what Katherine was demonstrating for us. And we also saw that learners are investing quite significant time and money in the programs, but the financial returns are not as apparent, at least for now. So questions that we think are worth considering are: should more employers consider supporting employees in participating in these programs as a low-cost alternative to traditional talent development? And in order to answer that question, I think we need to have some way of quantifying the benefits to employers. So we've looked at benefits to institutions offering them, to the learners. There also have to be benefits to the employers. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Q&A, and I'll leave our contact details up here for the moment in case people want to reach out to anybody for detailed questions on their parts of the presentation.
Yeah, thank you for that, everyone. It's very interesting and very thorough. I'm curious about how acceptability of such alternative degrees has been, part of your research. Have you looked at, the corporate space and how accepting they were of these types of specializations, micromasters, and other kinds of alternative credentials? And then in turn, how has your research focus changed with societal expectations and acceptances? And what aspects of it have you not researched that you could recommend to others who might be entering this field, maybe thinking about doing a dissertation in this field themselves or a master's degree? So, so this issue of alternative credentials, how it's changed, the perceptions have changed, the acceptability has changed within society. How has your research picked up on that and changed as well? But what are you maybe hoping to do in the future, or hope others will do in the future to get at that? And then Punyo has a follow-up.
Okay, so I think I'm going to try and tackle that, but there's no way I'm going to cover everything that you mentioned, so you can prompt me as needed. But in terms of how sort of the sort of reaction to these things and acceptance has changed, reactions were pretty mixed when moocs came on the scene, for example. I mean, there have been many other types of alternative credentials, but they're the ones that made the most press. I think 2012 was called the year of the MOOC by somebody in the New York Times. So it's what a lot of people associate the movement with. And
I was interviewed for that piece.
There we go.
And
All right.
Cut my interview out the day before it went to the New York Times published it. So
what did you say that they had to cut out?
I don't know. The editor said, no, we're not putting something from bonk in there. It's just a lot of bonk. So it was deleted. True story.
Okay, well, I know at the time that there were some people who were super excited about the possibility of being able to offer education for free across the entire world. I used to make fun of the then CEO of edX for showing pictures of small children sitting under a bridge in India with their laptops, and that apparently they would be learning through these kinds of credentials. But in any case, the idea of democratization was a big one at the time. And I think some of us, including myself and anybody who knows anything about online learning, was pretty skeptical that there would be any democratization going on. I'm not sure that we could have predicted quite the extent to which they're not democratic. We were all somewhat surprised at how well educated people are that participate in these types of credentials. But it's not atypical. We see that in education, not just for students, but also teachers, right? There's always the joke for people who do professional development. It's always the teachers who don't need it that sign up for professional development. So similarly with learners, it's generally the case that people who are interested in education sign up for more of it, and people who are successful sign up for more of it. But in any case, so I think that, that there were some surprises there. I think we've moved away from thinking this is going to democratize education. And I think that people are seeing them more as sort of reskilling, upskilling type opportunities for people either looking to move careers or just needing to keep up with changes in the workplace. So I think that covers one of the items. In terms of our research, how it's progressed, our initial research was only focused on the institutions offering the MOOCs at the time. And I'll say the only criticism I received of the report that I wrote on that, or I and my colleague wrote on that, was that we didn't address the perspective of learners. So whoever it was that made that criticism, I have now spent the last 6 years trying to address the perspective of learners. So I hope I have redeemed myself from that point of view. So I think we looked initially at institutions, we looked at the learners now, or we've been looking at that. So the one area that we haven't looked at that you are asking about is employers. What is their perspective on it? We're not the only ones studying this area. There was a study fairly early on that just interviewed about 104 employers, but that was way back. This is the most recent thing I've seen it's a survey of employers. I would recommend people read it. I would like to do a further study in this area. I had hoped to interview employers to ask them, what are they getting, or what are they seeing employees getting out of these in terms of contributions to the workplace. So there was one study that I was trying to do where I would interview employers about their employees and compare those who participated in these types of opportunities with those who didn't. But there are a lot of IRB issues around that, because the IRB was a bit concerned that if you put a spotlight on employees and show the answers to the employers, it's going to affect their career trajectory.
Oh, right. So before we go to Punya, do any of the three others want to make, one person want to make a comment? We'll have to go back and forth a little bit, but
I would like to make a comment. I remember you asking about further studies, what we would like to know, like in the future. One aspect that I particularly noticed, and I think all of us noticed, was reading, say, background academic literature to perform this study. And one of the issues that I believe arises with employers is that there is no homogeneity between these courses. When you receive a bachelor's degree from an accredited university, you know that a bachelor's from University A is the same as University B because it's a bachelor's degree. But in terms of these courses, there are no means to say make equivalent the courses. So this could be a potential area of focus for future research.
Thanks, Katherine. That makes a lot of sense. I think we'll have to go to Punya because we have a lot of questions. We're going to go back and forth between you guys. I know there's a lot of, all have things to say, but Punya, want to jump in here?
Sure. So first of all, a completely unrelated comment. I am a graphic designer. I love typography. And Fiona, I have to say the logo that you have for your company, I love it. I saw that and I fell in love with it. It's just fabulous use of typeface and black and white space. Awesome. Just completely unrelated comment. I had to say that. But coming to this point, one point I want to make and then ask a question. So this idea of democratization of learning, I remember when the MOOC thing started, my question was, we already have libraries. How many people have gone and learned nuclear science or whatever, if there is a public library in their neighborhood? So the fact that this information is now available doesn't necessarily translate into education and learning. And that was incredibly naive, I think, of people to think that just because you can make the information accessible does not necessarily translate into education, right? So, that was just the point I wanted to make there.
But Punya, they had to build extra libraries in Milwaukee to take care of Chris and I. We were always in the library. We're autodidacts.
Sure, for sure, right? But that's sort of a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek point. But the point is that access does not equate to education or learning, I think is an important piece that we need to keep in mind. But the question I really had was about the nature. One of the things that we hear about MOOCs is that because they're so large that there is not that personalization, that students don't feel connected. So I was curious if you had any data on the nature of the learner experience. Like, what did they talk about? Yes, they did learn something. That's good to know, right? But what was the nature of their experience? Would they come back to it again? Would they recommend it to other people? I was just curious if you had any data on that. Anybody can answer, whoever has sort of information.
Aasiya looks like she's about to speak. Do you want to say something? Otherwise, I will say something.
Sure. I just want to say that, from someone who's training to be an anthropologist, I was thinking how interesting it would be to do in-depth interviews with learners. Why is it that they are spending so much time, unpaid, leisure time on learning when they're not, as our study indicates, not being compensated for it largely, right? So more in-depth interviews probing questions and, sort of the experience. And what would be really interesting, and this is something that we tried doing, is the 1-year follow-up. Like, okay, so we did what were they expecting when they started these courses? How was the experience when they completed them? And then how do they feel, 1 year on or 2 years on? Also, I think, what Punya mentioned is really interesting. I'd love to know sort of like, would they recommend it? I'd love to ask them if, they could go back, would they still do it? Those kind of things. So yeah, another thing that just very quickly, Fiona, we all talked about is when COVID happened, we added the COVID question, right? And hoping to get an idea of how people used, like, we were all at home, we were all students of all ages were learning online. And how did that sort of come into play? We got a pretty small sample size for that, right? Like around 4,000, I think, because we added that question in 2020. But again, like very few actually reported benefits. So to sum it up, I think in-depth interviews would be great.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I ask about, people recommending, because in sort of the online circles, one of the things is sort of what simple measure that people have is the net promoter score, which is like, would you recommend it to someone else, right? I mean, that's such a simple, but I think a really insightful question that could be, easily asked. So thank you. Fiona, I know you had something to add.
I was just going to say, we did not ask about the net promoter score. We didn't put a net promoter score question in. Good idea. Thank you. Next time you'll help us design our surveys. But I'll say two things to address your question quite directly. One, I think we saw that the expectations for professional network were much higher than the realizations of it. So that gives you a small insight into the experience. So people didn't get as connected with others as they anticipated. We didn't ask a lot of questions about experience. So certainly, as Aasiya is saying, that would be an area for future research. The second thing I was going to say is that in the final follow-up survey that we only got 70 responses to, we did ask whether people took more of these courses. So it's not net promoter score, but did you take any more of these courses? And we haven't finished analyzing those, because it was like, should we bother even analyzing 70 responses? But Aasiya and I did take a quick look at it, and there were people taking more of the programs. It was one of the things we remarked on. It's like, gosh, this data looks exactly like the last set of data, but there were a couple of questions that we asked that had not been asked before, and that was one of them. And can I just jump in and to the person that is asking a question in the chat, Giselle Laros? I don't know the answer to your question, because we don't survey across the board on these types of alternative credentials. We focused on a very small number. But who is the gentleman? Somebody will know the name. There is a website that provides all kinds of really fabulous information on everything MOOC related. I will think of the name. Kurt, you will know, I'm sure you know. Dawal Shah is the person that operates it. DHAWAL.
Oh, yeah. It's called Class Central. So if you go into Class Central, I'll put the link in for you, Giselle. He has annual data. He has monthly data on MOOC participation rates and just what's happening in MOOCs in general. It's where I get a lot of my data from. So it's great. Thank you for reminding me of that. Before we go to Chris and then Young, and then I have a question at the end. Yuan, you want to add anything we haven't heard from you in a little while? Did you want to comment on anything that's been said quickly before we jump over to Chris?
Not really.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Mm-hmm.
Chris.
Okay, so I want to build on something you just said, Fiona, and also step back a little bit. So in January, we had an episode on how leading universities have learned from their teaching during the pandemic. And Harvard, Stanford, and MIT all produced internal reports on what they felt their university had learned and what they felt should be continued after the pandemic. And we got them all into the same virtual room and discussed all of that. And of course, the universities have very different missions and cultures. And so, as you would expect, there were many differences. But one of the things that they talked about was that the pandemic had taught the importance of engagement at scale, that the focus has been historically on how do we get learning at scale, how do we optimize learning at scale. But engagement at scale is important. And it's not only important for the reason you would expect, which is that if people aren't engaged, they're not going to learn. It's also important because of the issue you raised, which is social capital. That one of the reasons that people get involved in educational experiences is the other people that they meet, that then they can form relationships with. Arguably, our graduates get as much from the social capital of the other master's students that they're with as they do from what we do. Don't publicize this. I don't want to give up the secret sauce here that faculty have. But so let me frame the question now. One of the puzzles in ed tech is when you shift to doing better things instead of doing things better. So MOOCs came along, they were new, they had a lot of flaws that you and I predicted from the very beginning. But they got some traction and they've accomplished some things, and you've been, at the forefront in terms of studying what was gained and what was lost. The hypothesis that I advanced in that January episode is maybe it's time for massive learning 2.0, because the pandemic changed the infrastructure available. The pandemic forced many people who would never have gone online to learn some skills online. And the pandemic taught us something about engagement. And certainly we could do a lot better than MOOCs in terms of online engagement. So I don't know, whether you might be interested in trying to study people who might be on the edge in terms of thinking about what does massive learning look like when it's not a MOOC? And in particular, what does it look like when you try to go for engagement at scale rather than just learning at scale? I don't know what your thoughts are about that, but I personally have the feeling that it's time to start thinking about doing better things.
Okay, so I guess I should start by reading those 3 reports that you mentioned, that the internal reports. I don't know if they're publicly available, are they?
Yeah, the episode has links to the reports, and you can also get the highlights just by watching the episode.
So sure, I mean, people have been talking about engagement at scale for a while and failing to achieve it, and have experimented with a whole bunch of different things, from setting up little small group things. There was some success with having past completers of programs serve as kind of assistant instructors or advisors or mentors. And I think that was somewhat successful, but in general, not very successful. So I'm fascinated to see what the 3 universities have come up with. I will say that one, I'm thinking about this for K-12 as well. It's engagement can come in different forms. One is with people, right? Which is, I think, what you're talking about. And the other is with the platform, the content. We have this very different direction appearing that's going to compete massively with the sort of in-person engagement. And that's the AI-driven platforms, right? Which are going to become increasingly more engaging. Unfortunately, I mean, we see kids, who spend 12 hours a day on gaming and all those kinds of things. And I know a lot of us are terrified that that's the future of education is kids plugged into platforms endlessly because they're so engaging, and they've got, their own little personalized avatar telling them what to do and cheering them on and telling them how wonderful they are all day long. So that's my concern, is just that there are two ways to engage, or 2 sort of ways that we are thinking people might be engaged. I mean, I don't know, how do you think that competition is going to work out yourself? Are the in-person engagers going to win out over the AI-driven platforms?
Well, what worries me is that AI-driven can be used to just make teaching by telling and learning by listening, more intense. and somewhat more personalized. And I'm not attacking that, but I would hope that there's also people looking at sort of next generation online learning, which would be more learning by doing. It would be more micro-credentials. It would be more peer-based interactions of the kinds that you're describing to build social capital. I don't know how to build that right now, but I think we know the right direction to look in.
Do you want to give like some key points from what the university said, or we have to refer people back to the other?
We want to drive up our viewership by having them go back and look at that episode. And I also want Yang. I want Yang to get his shot in here.
Okay.
All right, thank you. This section, my time right now is like 2:20 a.m. I'm in Adelaide, South Australia. So I've been enjoying the conversation, but so I'm not sure I can frame my question coherently because I'm kind of halfway from my sleep. But anyway, so this is a very interesting study. There's several things. I just had a conversation with the University of Melbourne professors about the issue of micro-credentialing, alternative credentialing. And one of the things is that basically they have a new kind of college, and they said that it's very hard to make money. So remember in the 1990s, I think Columbia was engaged in a lot of them, even before the MOOCs were engaged. A lot of them want to make a lot of money. Everybody had virtual universities related to that. And so I don't know what's going to happen next. So I guess my question is really, Fiona and everybody here, is about the traditional educational institutions, because they occupy a market. And do they want other markets to come in? And largely, they occupy the market not necessarily by offering more knowledge, but by offering certified, acknowledged certificates of knowledge. They're one of the certification, agencies. So, in your study, actually, in your own reflection, do you see a retreat of traditional educational institutions? And even you were talking about K-12, for example. If teachers do not allow students to access other information, you won't get it, because children are engaged with TikTok, with their own stuff, but not really in educational setting. So from your study of this and all your reflection, do you see traditional educational institutions retreat from offering, and bring in new agencies and new providers into the whole system? You're on mute, Fiona.
Fiona, you're on mute.
Okay, so I think now it's finally unmuted. I think I must have a sticky mouse or something today. Okay, so I mean, higher education is going to fight tooth and nail to stay in business, right? And they're not trying to go out of business. Many of them are trying to reinvent themselves. I mean, Chris just talked about 3 top universities that are thinking about how do they do things differently in the future. So I don't think the higher education is going to go away by any means. I think it serves a certainly not in a hurry because of the credentialing provision they provide for employers. Like it's not about the learning, it's about, did you get the certificate from the university that they've heard of, right? Unfortunately, and I think that's what Katherine was trying to allude to there earlier on. But I do think they will be, and we've already seen it. And I was just reading an article yesterday. I have to try and find the link in a second, but just talking about, look at what universities who are struggling are doing right now. What are they doing at the margins? And they're already moving into offering alternative type credentials, working with outside institutions to make things more relevant, make things more engaging for their students. So I think they're going to morph. I mean, take Georgia Tech, who were experimenting. I mean, they did the $7,000 master's degree, which to this day, I don't totally understand how it's financially viable, except if they have really a lot of people signing up for it. I think one of the things that you said that that I think people need to really watch out for is the financials. And the craziest thing with MOOCs when they first came out was that people were offering them for free. It's just like, they are so expensive to produce. There's just no way this is sustainable. So that happened, pretty quickly. People realized that, but universities make a lot of mistakes offering stuff for free, thinking it's going to bring in tons of applicants to their traditional degree programs. I think that's where they go wrong. And if they focus on, let's provide credentials at a cost that we can sustain, that may be alternatives to traditional education, then they'll stay in business.
Thank you. I was wondering if anyone else, you guys such as Katherine, Aasiya, and Yuan, you have any reflection on that?
Yeah, I would like to add something. For me, these online courses offered by traditional education institutions is like the candy they give you, like when you are, or the little piece of food they give you when, like a tryout, a test out in the supermarket. It's the trick, they give it to you, you taste it, you like it, oh, this is good, and then you go and buy the whole thing for ages and ages. So basically, with there are some micromasters offered by very reputed universities on edX. MIT has, Harvard has, and they offer this scheme that it's like you do like 4 courses online and you get the micromasters, and then you go and have some classes like matched up with the actual classes, and then you go to the formal university and you get a formal degree. But then the formal degree, you have to pay it like at the price it is, Often this is the case. So it's like a form of capturing new students. It's like the same thing, I would say, equivalent to having an associate's degree and doing the transition to a formal college. So they are gaining an important chunk of students that otherwise they wouldn't have them. So I don't see traditional schooling disappearing. I see it strengthening in the future and widening its base of former students.
So I'm going to add to Young's question as the final question, and the others who haven't answered yet take a shot. In USA Today a few weeks ago, back on May 11th, they had an article, "The Window May Be Closing," and they were talking about degree programs and labor shortages and all sorts of things in here, but they had a little insert on the side of it. And in there, they said a 4-year degree was no longer a must-have for jobs such as financial advisor, loan officers, real estate brokers, store managers, human resource assistants, programmers, and so on and so on. But while many employers removed degree requirements from job descriptions, they still hired college graduates anyways. So I wonder if you want to comment on these micro-credentials and specializations, how they may play a huge role in the coming decade or not. And what have you seen in your data so far to indicate that this might be the new trend, the new normal might be just getting certificate to certificate, specialization to specialization, rather than really thinking about investing in a 4-year degree? Does anyone want to take a stab at adding to comments on what Young had to say or comments on what I've had to say here?
Yeah, I can say something about that. I think the traditional 4-year degree still has its merit. I don't remember the term in economics, but it's like the signaling theory, like the employer, they find it like taking like a lot of time and effort to vet the background of other candidates by themselves. So like in the pre-screening round, they just like sort out people like from this prestigious colleges like Johns Hopkins, Columbia, Harvard. It's like those people have like passed some sort of pre-screening by those like schools. So they must have some kind of like abilities and skills that I think like nowadays our society has changed a lot, and a lot of jobs, like what you said before, financial advisors and like programmers, some jobs are very niche and like super technical, and they only required very specific skills, and having like a traditional 4-year degree can help, but it may not be necessary. Like if I were an employer looking for a highly skilled programmer, and someone has like a MOOC degree, that proves that he has this specific skill that I am looking for, then I might give this person a shot. So it's basically like the alternative credentials, unbundling the traditional credential a bit, and it has its own merit too in time like this.
Okay, so anyone else have a comment here? We're running short. We got about a minute or so left. Anyone want to jump in? Fiona, you want to make a final comment overall about this show and about what maybe you haven't had a chance to say previously? Anything that you might want to offer as advice to people who are listening?
I would say that these types of alternative credentials are only going to become more important on the career scene. So I don't think they're a fad by any means, and I do think they're worth continuing to study. So I definitely would like to see more people looking at the employer perspective on this, and whether people who earn these credentials are as or more successful than people who have traditional degrees, or even who have, people who have traditional degrees and have these credentials on top of that, are they more successful than people with traditional degrees without them? So kind of like, what's the added value of these types of credentials? We need to try and document that.
Any of my co-hosts want to make a final comment here? Any others? So I just want to thank you again, Fiona, and the team, the entire team, for coming in here. It's, I don't know, it's afternoon here in Indiana. It's morning in Arizona with Cunha. I don't know what the time is in Pakistan or in Dominican Republic, but read Fiona's other reports. I mean, what she detailed at the beginning here, the timeline, each of these early reports led to these findings, and they're all informative. They all can back up all the hype that we have in this field. The early hype cycle is replete with all these, articles, news press release, and so forth. The year of the MOOC, the year of the not MOOC, and so forth. Well, you can open up one of these reports and get real substantive data to back up anything that you're writing. Next week, we've had a cancellation or delay for our topic for next week, for episode 154, and we're switching to a topic called EdTech books, which are free and open textbooks and free and open journals. We haven't made this one official yet, and I haven't gotten Young to shake his head yes in Pune, but it might be at 7 a.m. West in the Pacific Coast, 10 a.m. in Boston and Indiana, where I, myself, and where Chris are. This is not confirmed, but take a look at the website. It will come online in the next day or so. The blog post will be made. We'll be hearing from Rick West and Jason McDonald, and maybe Royce Kimmons from Brigham Young University, talk about this fantastic website which provides free and open access to EdTech books that you normally have to spend tons and tons of money on, and they're going to give us the rationale and the findings of their studies so far.